Billionaire hired a waitress as his personal chef. Her secret recipe changed his life. No one in New York's high society ever thought Daniel Hawthorne could be surprised by anything. Not after the millions he'd made, the empires he'd built, and the hearts he'd long since forgotten how to care for. Yet the night he tasted the soup made by a small-town waitress named Emma Cole, something in him shifted. Quietly, invisibly, like a door unlocking after years of silence. It wasn't the flavor that stunned him. It was what it reminded him of. A memory he didn't know he'd lost. A home he hadn't had in decades. That single taste would lead to the most unexpected chapter of his life. But at that moment, all he could think was, who cooked this? Before we continue, if you believe that love still has the power to change even the coldest hearts, subscribe to this channel and join stories that remind us why we still believe. Daniel Hawthorne wasn't known for warmth. The billionaire CEO of Hawthorne Enterprises, he commanded a skyline of glass towers that reflected his perfection. Immaculate, unreachable, untouchable. People spoke his name with a mix of envy and fear, and that suited him fine. He'd built his fortune on precision, discipline, and control. But no one really knew that control came at a cost, a lonely silence he carried everywhere. The echo of a family he'd lost long before success had found him. Emma Cole, on the other hand, lived in a world Daniel never noticed. Her days began before dawn in a narrow apartment over a laundromat, where she'd help her mother before heading to her shift at Luna's diner. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. She took pride in feeding people who couldn't afford fine dining: truckers, nurses, tired fathers, and children who smiled just because her cooking made them feel safe. She never imagined a man like Daniel would walk through those doors. He hadn't meant to stop there. His driver had taken a wrong turn after a late meeting, and the rain had been relentless. The car had stalled, and the only light nearby came from that old diner's neon sign, flickering through the storm. When he stepped inside, the bell above the door jingled, a sound far too gentle for the world he knew. Emma looked up from behind the counter, her hands dusted with flour. "You look like you need something warm," she said, not recognizing him, not caring. Daniel didn't respond right away. He was soaked, irritated, and completely out of place. "Just coffee," he muttered. She poured it, setting it in front of him. "It's on the house if you tell me what's got you looking like the sky's falling." He looked up, surprised. "Excuse me?" She smiled, wiping her hands on her apron. "You heard me. People come in here with that same look every night. Coffee helps, but talking works faster." He almost laughed, almost. "You really think you can fix the world with coffee?" "No," she said simply, "but I can make it a little less cold." That was the first time someone had spoken to Daniel Hawthorne without expectation, fear, or formality in years. And though he didn't answer, something about her tone, soft but certain, stayed with him. When his order came, he barely noticed what she'd placed in front of him, a steaming bowl of soup, fragrant and rich. "Oh, you didn't order it," she said, "but trust me." He took one reluctant spoonful to and froze. The flavor was unlike anything he'd tasted in years. Simple but perfect. He set the spoon down, suddenly unsteady. "What is this?" Emma tilted her head. "My mother's recipe. She used to make it when I was little. We didn't have much, but it made us feel rich." He didn't say it out loud, but it reminded him of something his own mother used to make, before the world had demanded he stop being a boy who remembered things like warmth and comfort. When he left that night, he didn't even tell her his name. But the next morning, his assistant found him sitting at his desk, the untouched breakfast tray beside him, and a strange look in his eyes. "Find me the woman who runs Luna's diner," he said. 2 days later, Emma was cleaning tables when a man in a tailored suit walked in. "Miss Cole?" he asked. "Mr. Hawthorne would like to speak with you." She blinked. "Who?" Daniel Hawthorne, her hands stilled on the cloth. "The billionaire? The one whose face was in magazines and finance reports. Is this a joke?" The man handed her a card embossed with gold lettering. "He wants to make you an offer." By the next afternoon, Emma found herself standing in front of Hawthorne Tower, 50 floors of glass and ambition. She felt small in the marble lobby, her worn shoes echoing against the polished floor. When the elevator doors opened on the top floor, Daniel was there, crisp suit, sharp posture. Every inch the man whose time was worth more than most people's lives. He studied her for a long moment. "You made something that I haven't stopped thinking about since I tasted it." She frowned. "The soup?" "Yes," he said, "and I want you to make it again. For me exclusively." She blinked. "You want to hire me to cook soup?" "Not just soup," he said. "Everything. Breakfast, lunch, dinner. You'll live at my estate and prepare my meals. Salary will be more than you've ever imagined." Emma stared at him, caught between disbelief and confusion. "Why me? You could hire any chef in New York." "I don't want a chef," he said quietly. "I want someone who knows how to make food that feels like something." There was something in his voice then, a crack in the steel, a small, invisible grief. She hesitated. "You don't even know me." "Maybe not," he said. "But I know your cooking made me remember what peace tastes like." For the first time, she didn't know what to say. She agreed only after he promised one condition, that she could cook however she wanted. No menus, no luxury ingredients, just heart. That night, as she unpacked in the quiet guest cottage on his estate, she looked out the window at the sprawling mansion and whispered to herself, "What am I doing here?" But in another room, Daniel sat alone at a long dining table built for 20, staring at the single-place setting in front of him. For the first time in years, he felt the faint pull of something unfamiliar. It wasn't hunger, it was the beginning of change. The next morning began with silence, the kind that lived in the corners of mansions too large for one man. Daniel's estate was breathtaking, perched above the Hudson like a monument to control. Every inch gleamed with perfection, marble, glass, symmetry. Yet under the surface it felt cold, untouched, like a museum built for no one. Emma woke early, her body still attuned to diner hours. She tied her hair back, rolled up her sleeves and stepped into the sprawling kitchen that looked more like a showroom than a place for real food. Stainless steel reflected her every movement. Even the knives were lined up like soldiers. She found the pantry stocked with imported goods, truffle oil, saffron, caviar, all luxuries she'd never used. She smiled faintly and reached instead for the simple things. Onions, garlic, tomatoes, fresh herbs. When Daniel entered, he found her humming softly, sleeves rolled to her elbows, a wooden spoon in her hand, as if she'd been born with it. The smell hit him first, something familiar, comforting, and entirely out of place in a kitchen that usually smelled of nothing at all. "What are you making?" he asked, his voice still carrying the tone of someone used to being obeyed. "Breakfast," she said simply, "for both of us." He frowned slightly. "I didn't ask for that." "I know," she said without looking up, "but you looked like a man who hasn't eaten with another person in a while." He was taken aback, not by her words, but by the ease with which she said them. Most people in his orbit measured every syllable around him. Emma didn't. She just existed, like sunlight that didn't ask permission to fall. He hesitated, then sat down at the long dining table, watching her move. The rhythm of her work was peaceful, intentional. Every motion had purpose, every sound, the chop of vegetables, the stir of a pot, felt alive. When she finally brought the plates out, she didn't serve him first. She sat across from him, folding her hands, waiting. He looked at her. "You're not going to stand there?" "I cook, I eat," she said with a small grin. "Otherwise, it's just a performance." He studied her for a moment, then picked up his fork. The first bite caught him off guard. Simple eggs, herbs, toast. But it was the balance that struck him. The flavors worked together like conversation, subtle, unpretentious, human. He looked up. "This isn't what I expected." "I'll take that as a compliment. It's not luxury," he said. She smiled. "Neither is happiness." Something in that answer lingered. He didn't reply, just kept eating, slower this time, as if trying to understand the difference between satisfaction and fulfillment. When she cleared the plates, he said almost absently, "You could have been a chef anywhere." "Why a diner?" She shrugged. "Because people there don't pretend. You learn more about a person from what they order at midnight than you ever do from what they say at lunch." He almost smiled. "Almost. And what do you think you've learned about me?" She looked at him, her eyes steady. "That you're starving, but not for food." He met her gaze, and for a moment, the world outside that kitchen didn't exist. Later that day, Daniel went through his routine. calls, meetings, numbers, all the predictable noise of his empire. But something had changed. The quiet after each conversation felt heavier. The taste of the morning still clung to his thoughts. By evening, he found himself walking toward the kitchen again, drawn by the faint melody of humming. Emma was there, hair loosely tied, a smudge of flour on her cheek. She looked up as he entered. "Back for dinner?" she teased. He nodded. "You could say that." "Good," she said, "because I made something that might remind you what warmth tastes like." He watched as she served him a bowl of soup, the same one he'd had that first night at the diner. "Why this?" he asked. "Because the first time you had it, you looked like you'd remembered something," she said softly. "And I want to see if you still can." He picked up the spoon slowly, his reflection shimmering in the golden broth. When he tasted it, the memory came back clearer this time. Not just the flavor, but the image of a small kitchen, a woman humming as she stirred a pot, a boy laughing nearby. His mother. He set the spoon down. "You don't know what this means," she tilted her head. "Then tell me." He didn't. He couldn't. The ache in his chest was too raw, too old. Instead, he said quietly, "My mother used to make something like this. Before she died," Emma's voice softened. "Then I'll make it again tomorrow. And the day after. Until it feels like she never left." He looked at her, startled by the tenderness in her words, the kind that came from someone who understood loss, but never let it break her. That night, Daniel didn't eat alone for the first time in years. The next morning, she was already in the kitchen again, humming that same nameless tune, the sound echoing through the vast halls like sunlight through an old house. But outside those walls, the world was still watching. Investors, assistants, gossip columns. And when Daniel's head of staff noticed the change in his employer's routine, the whispers began. By the end of the week, one question spread through every corner of his empire like a quiet scandal. Who was the woman who'd made the untouchable billionaire come home for dinner? The whispers reached Daniel before he even stepped into his office. His assistant, Olivia, stood by the glass doors, her eyes flicking nervously between the tablet in her hands and his unreadable expression. "Morning headlines are unusual, sir," she said. "The press caught wind of someone living at the estate. They're speculating." Daniel didn't slow down. "They always speculate." Olivia followed him inside. "This time it's personal. They're calling her the mystery woman in the kitchen. Some think she's your fiancé. Others think you're hiding something." He stopped, turning toward her. "I am hiding something. Privacy." Olivia didn't push further, but her silence carried a message of its own. Daniel dismissed her with a glance, though his thoughts stayed tangled long after she left. That evening, when he returned home, he found Emma sitting by the kitchen counter, reading an old cookbook she'd brought from the diner. She looked up and smiled like nothing in the world had changed. "Busy day?" she asked. "Apparently we're engaged," he replied dryly. Her eyes widened for a second before she laughed, a soft, genuine laugh that bounced off the marble and made the house feel human again. "Well, congratulations to us then." He almost smiled, then sighed. "People don't like when I do things they can't explain. You being here confuses them." "Then maybe that's good," she said, flipping a page. "People who live by rules need a little confusion to remind them they're alive." He watched her for a long moment. "You don't seem afraid of me." "I'm not," she said. "Should I be?" "No," he said quietly. "But everyone else is." Emma set the book down. "That sounds lonely." He didn't answer. Instead, he moved to the window. The reflection of the two of them, him in his immaculate suit, her in her simple uniform, painted a strange picture. Two people who, by every law of life and class, should have never shared the same air. And yet they did. Later, over dinner, she noticed how distant he'd become. "You're thinking about the world outside this house again," she said softly. He nodded. "It never stops." "You could let it," she said. "At least for tonight." He glanced at her as if the suggestion was foreign, but the warmth in her eyes disarmed him. For the first time in years, Daniel let someone distract him from his empire. As they ate, she asked him questions no one else dared to. "What did you want to be before you became all this?" He looked at her, caught off guard. "Before?" "Yes," she said. "Before money became your name." He thought for a moment. "A musician," he said, almost to himself. My mother played piano. She taught me. I wanted to write music, but after she passed, I stopped. My father said dreams didn't pay for grief. Emma leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. Maybe that's why your life feels out of tune. Her words struck him deeper than he expected. He didn't speak again for a long time, but his eyes stayed on her, as if somewhere behind her simplicity, he could hear the echo of the music he'd buried. When dinner was done, she cleaned up quietly while he lingered near the counter. Finally, he asked, "Why are you still here, Emma?" "You've seen how I live. The rules, the silence. Most people would have run." She turned, drying her hands. "Because silence doesn't scare me. It's just a sign that something important hasn't been said yet." He felt the weight of those words. Something inside him, a wall built over years of success and solitude, cracked slightly. The next morning, Daniel did something uncharacteristic. He cancelled a board meeting. Instead, he asked Emma to teach him something, how to make her soup. She laughed in disbelief. "Do you cook?" "I run billion-dollar companies," he said. "I can follow a recipe, but can you follow your heart?" She teased. He looked at her. Not the way a man of power looks at an employee, but like a man seeing sunlight for the first time in years. "I'm trying." The morning unfolded slowly, with laughter spilling through the kitchen like music. She guided his hands as he chopped vegetables, their shoulders brushing. He burned his first batch, earning a quiet giggle from her that he pretended not to enjoy as much as he did. When the soup was done, he tasted it and frowned slightly. "It's not yours." "Of course not," she said. "You didn't let it breathe." "Let it what?" "The heat, the timing, you rushed it. Some things need space to become what they're meant to be." He set the spoon down, her words echoing somewhere beyond the kitchen. That night, he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about her laughter, her patience, the way she looked at life as if everything broken could still be mended. But outside, the press storm grew. By morning, there were cameras at the estate gates, and among the flashing lights and shouted questions, someone from his past appeared, someone who hadn't spoken to him in years. His ex-fiancée, Vanessa. And the first thing she said when she saw Emma standing beside him was not a greeting, it was a challenge. "So this is who replaced me." The tension in the air was sharp enough to cut. Vanessa stood in the marble foyer, poised as ever, flawless makeup, diamonds at her wrist, and a voice that could slice through steel. She looked at Emma like one might look at an imposter in a sacred place. Emma froze, the tray of breakfast she had been carrying trembling slightly in her hands. Daniel, standing between them, spoke first, his tone low and even. "No one replaced you, Vanessa. You left." Vanessa's red lips curved into a half-smile. "I left because you became a ghost in your own life, Daniel. I thought maybe the empire would keep you company." Her eyes flicked toward Emma. "But I see you found something warmer than board meetings." "Miss, I'm just—" Emma began. But Daniel interrupted gently, his eyes fixed on Vanessa. "She's not for you to talk about." The room fell silent. Outside, the rain tapped against the tall windows, soft and relentless. Emma set the tray down and murmured, "I'll go." But Daniel turned to her. "Stay." That single word changed the temperature in the room. Vanessa crossed her arms, her laugh brittle. "Of course, the billionaire orders, and the waitress obeys." How poetic. Emma met her gaze, steady and calm. "I don't obey, I listen. There's a difference." Vanessa blinked, startled by the quiet strength in her tone, but Daniel looked at Emma with something close to admiration. The kind of respect he rarely gave anyone. When Vanessa finally left, her perfume lingered in the air long after her footsteps faded. Emma turned to Daniel. "You didn't have to defend me." "Yes," he said simply. "I did." For a long moment they just stood there, the silence between them no longer cold but charged, fragile, like the space before a confession. Later that evening, Emma found him sitting alone in the library, a glass of untouched wine beside him. "You've been quiet," she said. "I was remembering," he replied. "Vanessa and I were supposed to get married last year. She left 2 weeks before the wedding. Said I didn't know how to love anything that couldn't make a profit." Emma sat across from him. Maybe she wasn't wrong. He looked at her sharply, but she didn't flinch. "Then teach me," he said finally. "If I don't know how," she tilted her head. "Love isn't something you learn from a book, Daniel." "Then show me," he whispered. That night marked the first time they cooked together again. But this time it wasn't just about food. It was about rhythm, about trust, about timing. She watched him stir, slower now, patient, as if listening to something unseen. "Better," she said softly. He smiled, a real one this time. "You sound like my mother." Emma blinked. "You've never mentioned her before." He hesitated, then set the spoon down. She was a chef, not the kind that cooks for others. She cooked for love. "My father hated that. Said it was a waste of her talent. She died believing that her passion was small because it didn't make money." Emma looked at him for a long moment, her heart heavy. "Then she'd be proud of you tonight." He turned to her, his voice barely a whisper. "Because I burned fewer vegetables?" "No," she said. "Because you finally cooked for something other than yourself." The air between them changed after that. What began as an arrangement, a billionaire hiring a waitress, had become something deeper, more dangerous. The kind of connection that crossed the invisible lines of class, habit and fear. But just when Daniel began to feel alive again, the world outside started closing in. Rumors were spreading, not about Emma's food, but about her past. Someone had found out that she once worked at a diner owned by Daniel's biggest corporate rival. Whispers turned to stories. Stories turned to headlines. At dinner, Olivia, his assistant, placed a folded newspaper on the table. "You need to read this." He unfolded it, eyes narrowing at the headline. "The billionaire's new muse, a spy in the kitchen." Emma walked in moments later, drying her hands on a towel, unaware. Daniel's jaw tightened as he asked quietly, "Is there something you haven't told me?" Her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "The diner," he said. "Who owned it?" She froze. "Why?" "Answer me." Her voice trembled. "Yes, it was owned by Bradley & Co. I didn't know it mattered. I just needed a job." He stood up, his tone hard. "That man has spent years trying to destroy everything I built." Emma stepped forward. "And you think I'm part of that?" "I don't know what to think." Her eyes filled, but her voice stayed calm. "You asked me to show you love, Daniel. Love means trust. I trusted you with who I am, not where I worked." He turned away, the storm outside raging louder than the one in the room. "I can't fight both the world and my heart at the same time," he said finally. She nodded slowly, tears burning her eyes. "Then I'll stop being the battle." When the door closed behind her, the echo lingered like a wound. The next morning, the kitchen was empty, no laughter, no scent of soup simmering, no trace of her warmth. But something on the counter caught his eye. A folded piece of paper, stained slightly with flour, a handwritten recipe. At the top, in her neat, looping handwriting, it read, "For the day you remember what warmth tastes like." He unfolded it slowly, his fingers trembling. It wasn't just a recipe, it was a letter, and the first line broke him. "You taught me that even the coldest hands can learn to hold something gently again." Days passed, but the mansion felt wrong without her. The kitchen, once the only room in the house that seemed alive, was silent. The polished counters reflected nothing but his own solitude. Daniel tried to focus on work, burying himself in contracts and board meetings, but her absence was louder than any silence he'd ever known. At night, he'd find himself rereading her note, tracing the curve of her handwriting, as if the ink still carried her warmth. He didn't understand why it hurt. She had only been an employee. That was what he told himself. Over and over, but every time he looked at that recipe, every time he remembered the sound of her laugh echoing between marble and glass, the lie cracked a little more. Meanwhile, the world outside had turned savage. The tabloids feasted on the story, the billionaire and the waitress scandal. Every magazine had her picture. Every commentator had a theory. Some said she'd stolen from him. Others claimed she'd been planted to destroy his reputation. One evening, Olivia entered his office, hesitant. "There's something you should see." She placed a small box on his desk. Inside were a dozen letters, real handwritten letters, sent to his PR office by people he didn't know. "They're not from investors," Olivia said. "They're from people who saw the story and felt something." He picked one up, reading the first line aloud. "If what they say is true, then you're lucky. Not every man gets to be changed by someone who cooks with her heart." He leaned back in his chair, his chest tightening. The public wasn't laughing. They were moved. They weren't mocking the story. They were romanticizing it. Emma had unknowingly done what no marketing campaign or fortune ever could, made the world feel something for him again. And yet, she was gone. That night, Daniel sat in the kitchen, staring at the note she'd left behind. Then, almost without realizing it, he began to follow the recipe, the same one he'd burned the first time they cooked together. He lit the stove, poured the broth, cut the vegetables slowly, methodically. He could almost hear her voice. "Don't rush it. Let it breathe." By the time the aroma filled the air, something inside him shifted. The soup wasn't perfect, but it was honest. He took a small spoonful, tasted it, and closed his eyes. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about his company, his image, or his wealth. He was thinking about her, about the way she'd made him laugh, the way she saw through his armor without even trying, the way she made the house feel like home. He set the spoon down and said aloud, "I was wrong." Olivia, standing quietly at the door, heard him. "Then maybe you should tell her." He looked up, startled. "She wouldn't want to see me." Olivia crossed her arms. "You'd be surprised what people forgive when the apology is real." The next morning, Daniel did something he hadn't done in years. He went out alone. No driver, no entourage, no security detail. Just a man in a dark coat, carrying a folded recipe in his pocket. He drove to the small coastal town where she had grown up. He remembered her mentioning it once, in passing, while laughing over burnt bread. When he arrived, it was late afternoon. The wind smelled of salt and coffee, and the streets were lined with small cafes. He found her easily, not because of fame or recognition, but because her presence filled the air wherever she went. She was behind the counter of a small seaside cafe, hair tied up, smiling politely at customers. She looked exactly the same and completely different, lighter somehow, like someone who had made peace with the pain. He stepped inside. The bell above the door chimed. When she looked up and saw him, her smile faltered. "Daniel," she said softly, as if the name itself hurt to say. He took a breath. "You left me a recipe." She wiped her hands on her apron, eyes steady but guarded. "I left you a lesson." He nodded slowly. "I learned it." "Too late maybe, but I did." Emma said nothing, waiting. The silence between them was thick, full of everything that had gone unsaid. "I didn't trust you," he said finally. "Not because of who you were, but because of what I was. I thought money could protect me from pain. It didn't. It just kept me from feeling anything at all." She looked down. "And now?" "Now I'd trade every dollar I've ever made for one more morning in that kitchen with you." Her eyes softened, not entirely forgiving, but no longer closed. "You can't buy back moments, Daniel." "I know," he said, "but maybe I can earn a new one." For a long while she just stared at him. Then, without a word, she turned back to the stove. He thought she was walking away, but instead, she picked up a pot and motioned toward the counter. "If you're serious," she said, "you can start by chopping those onions." He smiled, a rare, quiet smile, and joined her. They cooked together like before, cautious at first, then natural. The rhythm returned, that unspoken dance between warmth and restraint. At one point she laughed when he nearly sliced a tomato wrong, and the sound sent something electric through him. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the cafe in golden amber, he said quietly, "You make everything feel alive again." She didn't answer, just handed him a spoon. "Taste," he did. The flavor was perfect, but that wasn't what made him close his eyes. It was the realization that she wasn't just feeding him. She was forgiving him. Outside, the sea roared softly against the rocks, as if applauding something it had been waiting to see for a long time. Then Emma turned to him, her voice low but certain. "You can stay for dinner, if you're not in a hurry to run back to your empire." He smiled faintly. "I'm not sure it feels like mine anymore." She met his gaze, calm, curious, quietly hopeful. "Then maybe," she said, "it's time to build something new." But just as peace began to find them, a shadow passed across the cafe window, a photographer. And when the flash went off, Daniel knew their quiet moment was over. By morning, their faces were everywhere. The photo, Daniel leaning close to Emma at the cafe counter, her soft smile on his lips, had become the newest obsession of every news outlet. The headlines varied in tone but shared one word that made him sick: affair. The media twisted the story. They called her the waitress who seduced a billionaire and painted him as a man who'd lost control. Overnight, the fragile peace they'd built was torn apart by flashing cameras and sensationalism. Emma's small cafe turned into a circus. Reporters lingered outside, shouting questions she refused to answer. Customers stopped coming, intimidated by the chaos. By noon, she was forced to lock the doors. Daniel showed up that evening, his car parked discreetly on a side street. She opened the door just enough to meet his eyes, tired, conflicted, but still warm. "I didn't mean for this to happen," he said softly. "I know," she replied. "But it did." He glanced past her shoulder, the cafe dark except for a single bulb flickering above the counter. "They'll calm down," he promised. She shook her head. "You don't understand. You can disappear behind your gates." "I can't. This is my home." "My life." He stepped closer. "Then let me protect you." Her voice wavered. "From you?" That landed hard. He had no answer. She sighed, unlocking the door wider. "Come in. We shouldn't talk out here." He followed her inside, the sound of the rain filling the silence between them. She poured him coffee, instinctively like it was muscle memory, and sat across from him. "I never asked for any of this," she said, her tone even but full of pain. "I just wanted to cook, to live quietly, to be useful." "You are," he said, "more than you know." "Then why does it feel like I've ruined everything I touch?" He reached across the table, his hand hovering above hers but not daring to touch. "Because you walked into a storm I created." Her eyes met his, and for a moment she saw the man beneath the wealth, the one who was finally starting to understand the cost of his world. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "Fix it," he said simply. "For you," she frowned. "And how do you plan to fix the entire world, Daniel?" He smiled sadly. "One truth at a time." That night, Daniel made a decision that would change everything. He called his PR team, cancelled his next public appearance, and arranged a press conference, not to defend himself but to tell the truth. When Olivia found out, she was furious. "You can't do this," she warned. "You're risking your reputation, your shareholders." "I've spent my entire life protecting an image," and he said. "Maybe it's time I protect something real." The next afternoon, the cameras were waiting. Reporters filled the small conference hall, hungry for scandal. Daniel stepped onto the stage, no notes, no teleprompter, just a folded piece of paper in his pocket. He looked straight into the sea of microphones. "You've all heard the story," he began. "And most of it is wrong." Flashes erupted, but he didn't flinch. "I didn't meet Emma because I was looking for romance. I met her because she reminded me what kindness looks like when it asks for nothing in return. She's not a spy. She's not a scandal. She's a human being who showed me that warmth doesn't come from wealth." The room fell still. He paused, his voice quiet but firm. "I was a man who could buy anything, and yet for years I owned nothing that mattered. Until I met her." One journalist shouted, "Are you in love with her?" Daniel hesitated, the kind of silence that says more than words ever could. Then, without hiding, he said, "Yes." The room exploded. Questions flew. Flashes blinded him, but he stayed calm, his tone unwavering. "If that ruins me, then maybe I was built on the wrong foundation to begin with." By the time he stepped off the stage, the story had changed. No longer billionaire scandal. Now it was billionaire confesses his love for Waitress. Emma saw it all on the cafe's small TV. Her hands trembled as she watched him speak, raw and unguarded. She didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or run. That evening, Daniel returned to the cafe again. No cameras this time, no press. Just him, soaked from the rain, breathing hard as if he'd run there. She opened the door slowly. "You shouldn't be here." He smiled faintly. "I've been told that before. Do you realize what you've done?" she asked, stepping back. "The world's going to eat you alive." He nodded. "Maybe, but at least now they'll be eating the truth." She stared at him, the stubborn, brilliant, impossible man who somehow kept breaking the walls around her. "You didn't have to do this for me." "I didn't," he said quietly. "I did it because it was the only way to live with myself." The rain outside softened, turning into a steady whisper against the windows. He took a step closer. "Emma," "I meant every word." Her breath caught. "Then why does it still hurt?" "Because the world hasn't learned to love what doesn't fit its story," he said. She looked away, blinking hard. "You don't belong here, Daniel." "Then tell me where I do." She hesitated, torn between fear and longing. "You belong somewhere honest." He took her hand gently. "Then I'm already there." Outside, lightning flashed across the sea. For a moment, their reflections shimmered on the wet glass. Two people who shouldn't have found each other yet somehow did. Then the cafe door burst open. Olivia stood there, drenched and breathless. "Daniel," she said urgently. "You need to come now." He turned, startled. "What happened?" She hesitated before answering. "Your company board. They just voted to remove you as CEO." The words hit him like a blow. For a moment, Daniel just stood there, rain dripping from his hair, eyes fixed on Olivia as if trying to make sense of what she'd said. "They can't," he muttered. "They wouldn't dare." "They already did," Olivia said, lowering her voice. "It's all over the networks. They're calling it a strategic shift in leadership." Emma stepped closer, her voice gentle but firm. "Daniel, what does that mean?" "It means," he said bitterly, "that the empire my father built, that I spent my entire life protecting, is no longer mine." The silence that followed was thick with shock. The only sound was the rain outside, sliding down the glass like tears neither of them could shed. Olivia spoke softly. "I warned you this could happen. The shareholders panicked. They said your confession made you look unstable." Emma flinched at the word. "Unstable." Daniel let out a dry laugh. "Apparently honesty is a liability now." He walked to the counter, leaning on it heavily, staring at the floor. "It's funny. I've lost billions before. Bad deals, bad markets. But I've never felt this empty." Emma hesitated before speaking. "Maybe that's because this time you didn't lose money. You lost what you thought defined you." He looked up at her, searching her face. "And what defines me now?" She met his gaze steadily. "That depends on what you do next." He let out a long breath, the fight slowly draining from his posture. Olivia checked her phone. "The media's spinning the story already. Some say you resigned to focus on your personal life. Others say you're hiding out. If you stay here, they'll find you." Emma crossed her arms. "Then he stays here. They won't look for him in a small cafe." Olivia frowned. "Emma, this isn't your responsibility." But Emma's tone was quiet and certain. "Maybe it is." Daniel watched her, the courage in her voice, the way she didn't flinch at the chaos his world had brought into hers. He'd spent years surrounded by people who worshipped his wealth, but fled from his humanity. She was the first person who stayed. "Thank you," he said softly. She shrugged. "You'd do the same for me." He smiled faintly. "I'd like to think so." That night, for the first time, the billionaire slept on the couch in a small seaside cafe. The wind howled outside, but inside, the air was warm, scented with coffee, salt, and something close to peace. In the morning, Emma found him sitting at one of the tables, staring at the sunrise through the rain-streaked window. He looked different and not broken, but human. "You look like a man who just lost everything," she said, setting 2 cups of coffee down. He nodded. "I did, and I'm still here," he said quietly. She smiled. "Then maybe you didn't lose the right things." They drank in silence for a while, watching the light shift across the waves. For once there was no rush, no plan, no empire demanding his attention. Just 2 people who didn't need to fill the quiet. Later that day, Olivia returned with updates. "Your lawyers say the board is holding a meeting tomorrow. If you want your position back, you have one chance. Show them you're still in control." Daniel looked at Emma. "Control," he said slowly. "That word doesn't mean what it used to. You're really not going back, are you?" Olivia asked. He shook his head. "I can't run a world that doesn't feel alive anymore." Emma's eyes softened, pride glinting quietly behind them. "So what will you do instead?" He thought for a long moment, then said, "Maybe it's time I build something that feeds more than my ego." Olivia smiled faintly. "I'll tell the press you're retired." When she left, Emma turned to him. "You mean that?" He nodded. "I want to start over. With something honest?" She looked at him curiously. "Like what?" He gestured around the small cafe. "Like this. Food, people, warmth, you?" Her breath caught. "Oh, you can't be serious." He grinned. The first real smile she'd seen since the storm began. Completely. The next weeks blurred into something strange and beautiful. Daniel didn't return to the mansion. He stayed by the coast, helping her rebuild the cafe's reputation. Word spread fast. Not about scandal this time, but about the billionaire who traded boardrooms for a kitchen apron. Locals started coming back. Not for the novelty, but because the place felt different now. Alive, hopeful, like a small rebellion against everything fake. One afternoon, Emma found him behind the counter, sleeves rolled up, helping an elderly couple choose pastries. She leaned against the doorframe, watching him laugh, really laughing for the first time in months. "You're not terrible at this," she teased. He looked over his shoulder. High praise coming from the professional. "Don't get used to it." He stepped closer. Too late. The air between them tightened, not with tension this time, but something deeper, familiar, dangerous, beautiful. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his voice low. "You changed everything," she swallowed hard. "So did you." He leaned in, and for a moment the world shrank. No wealth, no power, no fear. Just two people inches apart, held together by something neither could explain. But before their lips met, the cafe door swung open. Olivia's voice broke the spell. "Daniel, She stopped mid-sentence, realizing what she'd interrupted. He cleared his throat, stepping back. "Yes?" She hesitated, then held up a letter. "This came to the office before they shut it down. It's from your father's estate attorney." Daniel took the envelope, his brow furrowing. "What does it say?" Emma asked. He unfolded the paper, and as his eyes scanned the words, the color drained from his face. "My father," he whispered. "He left something I never knew existed." Emma frowned. "What is it?" Daniel looked up at her, stunned. "A second will." For a long moment, no one spoke. The hum of the espresso machine filled the air, the only sound breaking the heavy silence that followed Daniel's words. Emma looked at him, her brow furrowed with worry. "A second will? What does that even mean?" Daniel sank into one of the cafe chairs, unfolding the document again with trembling hands. The paper was old, yellowed at the edges, but the handwriting was unmistakable. His father's. It's dated 2 years after the one the lawyers used. "This one, it changes everything." Olivia sat beside him. "How?" He exhaled slowly. "The company, my company, it wasn't supposed to be mine." Emma's voice was soft. "Then whose?" Daniel looked up at her, his expression unreadable. "A foundation. He wanted it turned into something charitable, for underprivileged communities. The first will left it to me. The second one leaves it to everyone else." Olivia's mouth fell open. "But your father hated charity." He changed," Daniel interrupted, still reading. "The letter attached says he regretted how he raised me. He said he built an empire but forgot to build a heart." Emma stood frozen, her hands gripping the counter. "So if this will is real, it means everything I own isn't mine," Daniel said quietly. The weight of that truth pressed down on the room like fog. Olivia broke the silence first. "Daniel, listen to me. If this goes public, the board, the investors, they'll strip you of everything. You'll lose your name, your assets, your home." He looked at her, his tone calm but certain. "Maybe that's the point." Emma's eyes softened. "What are you thinking?" He leaned back, the corners of his mouth lifting in a sad, quiet smile. "I think my father finally gave me permission to stop pretending." For the rest of the day, Daniel barely spoke. He stayed at the cafe, helping Emma close early, moving in silence while thoughts battled behind his eyes. That night, after the last light was turned off, she found him sitting by the window again, staring at the rain outside. The same spot he'd sat the night his empire crumbled. She sat across from him, her voice gentle. "What are you going to do?" He looked at her, really looked at her, as though the answer might be hidden somewhere in her calmness. "I used to think my father's approval was the currency that defined me. Then I thought it was success, then control, then love, but now..." She waited. "Now I think it's peace," he said finally. "And peace doesn't come from holding on. It comes from letting go," Emma smiled faintly. "Then maybe this is his last lesson to you." Daniel turned his gaze back to the rain. "Maybe it's mine." By morning, he had made up his mind. He called a press conference, this time at the same small community center where his mother used to volunteer. When Olivia heard about it, she nearly dropped her phone. "You're not seriously going to..." "I am," he said. "If my father wanted redemption, I'll finish what he started." Emma didn't try to stop him. She simply watched as he buttoned his suit, the same way he had done the day he lost his title. Only now there was no armor in the gesture, no arrogance, just quiet resolve. "Be careful," she whispered. He smiled gently. "For the first time in my life, I am." The center was packed with reporters, employees, and investors who had come expecting defiance or damage control. What they got instead was something entirely different. Daniel stepped onto the small wooden stage, No podium, no spotlight, just the faint creak of old floorboards and the hum of anticipation. "I stand here not as a CEO," he began, "but as a son who finally learned what legacy really means." He unfolded the letter in his hand. "My father left behind something no one expected. Not wealth, not power, but regret, and a chance to make things right." Gasps rippled through the crowd as he held up the second will. "This document changes everything. The empire you know, the one that bears my family's name, will no longer belong to one man. It will belong to the people it was built upon." "Are you saying you're giving it all away?" someone shouted. He nodded once. "Every share, every property, every dollar. It will be converted into a foundation, one that supports those who were forgotten while we built towers of glass and gold." Chaos erupted. Reporters fired questions like bullets. "You'll be broke. Are you being coerced? Is this a publicity stunt?" Daniel raised his voice above the noise, steady, unwavering. "No, this is freedom." And then he left. Outside, the world spun around him, reporters shouting, cameras flashing, but for the first time he didn't feel caged by it. He walked through the storm with his head high, not as a billionaire, but as a man who had finally stepped outside his father's shadow. When he returned to the cafe that evening, Emma was waiting. The lights were dim, the place quiet, the scent of bread and coffee filling the air. She didn't speak when he walked in. She just watched him. "It's done," he said softly. She nodded. "I know." He sat at the counter, exhausted but lighter. "You should have seen their faces." "I can imagine," she said, smiling gently. "You just changed the world, Daniel." He shook his head. "No, I just stopped pretending I had to own it." For a while, neither of them said anything. Then Emma spoke, her tone curious but careful. "So what happens now?" Daniel looked around the cafe, the small space that had somehow become more of a home than his mansion ever was. "Now," he said, meeting her eyes, "now I learn how to live without being someone else's definition of success." She tilted her head, her voice soft but certain. "You might already be doing that," he smiled. "Maybe, but it feels like I'm just getting started." And as the storm faded outside, replaced by the still hum of the ocean, Emma leaned on the counter and said, "Then let's start with dinner." He laughed quietly. "Your recipes or mine?" "Yours," she teased. "You've got something to prove." But as they cooked together, side by side, in the quiet warmth of the cafe, neither of them noticed the shadow standing outside the window, a man in a long coat, holding a briefcase, watching, waiting, and in his hand, a document sealed with the same crest as Daniel's father's will. The knock came just as they were sitting down to eat. It wasn't loud, but it carried a strange finality, the kind of sound that makes your chest tighten before your mind catches up. Emma looked up, a fork halfway to her lips. Daniel's expression shifted instantly, alert, wary. The man outside stepped into the dim light of the cafe window, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. His coat was dark, his presence deliberate. "Stay here," Daniel murmured. He rose and went to the door, opening it just enough to let the man's voice in. "Mr. Harland?" the stranger asked, his tone polite but cold. "I represent the Harland Estates legal division. There are new matters that require your attention." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I've already settled the estate. Whatever it is, it can wait." "I'm afraid it cannot," the man said, slipping a sealed envelope from his briefcase. The crest was unmistakable, the same golden insignia from his father's private documents. Daniel took it, his pulse quickening. The man nodded once and stepped back into the rain. "Good evening, sir, and congratulations on your courage. Your father would have approved." Before Daniel could respond, the man was gone, swallowed by the storm. Emma approached, eyes wide. "What is it?" He stared at the envelope for a long moment, then tore it open. Inside was a letter, short, handwritten in his father's old stern script. But at the bottom, the signature was dated 2 months after his death. His hands trembled. "This can't be right. What does it say?" Emma asked softly. He read aloud, his voice low and uneven. "If you are reading this, then my second will has found its way to you. But there is one truth I never confessed. Not to the board, not to the family, not even to your mother. I made a mistake that money could never fix. A mistake named Samuel." He stopped. The room felt suddenly smaller. "Samuel?" Emma asked. Daniel swallowed hard. "That was my brother's name. Or at least it was supposed to be." Her brow furrowed. Supposed to be? He sank into a chair, staring at the letter as if it might burn him. My mother had twins, Emma. I was told the other one didn't survive. Emma's breath caught. You mean my father lied? He turned the letter around, revealing the final lines. I sent Samuel away as an infant to protect the company from what I feared would divide it. I see now that the division was always me. If he is still alive, he will find you. He deserves what you were given. He deserves his name. For a long time, neither of them moved. The storm outside swelled, lightning flashing across the glass, illuminating the shock on Daniel's face. Emma knelt beside him. Do you think he's alive? I don't know, Daniel whispered. But if he is, then everything I've ever owned, even the cafe, even my name, belongs to someone else. Emma placed her hand over his. You just gave away your empire, Daniel. What else could anyone take from you? He looked at her, the woman who had become his anchor in a world built on shifting ground. You don't understand. If he's alive, then my father's foundation, the shares, the legacy, it all transfers to him. Everything I've just done might belong to a stranger. Or to a brother, she said gently. He didn't answer. The word brother felt foreign on his tongue, like a ghost resurrected by ink and guilt. Over the next few days, Daniel searched. He called every contact, every legal office, every hospital his family's records ever touched. Nothing. It was as if Samuel had never existed, until one evening. Olivia walked into the cafe holding a folder. You might want to sit down, she said. Daniel took the folder, flipping it open. Inside was a faded birth certificate, followed by a recent photograph clipped to the corner. A man in his 30s. Brown hair, familiar eyes. He works for the foundation you just established, Olivia said quietly. He's been there for years. He goes by Sam Keller. He didn't know who he was until now. Daniel's throat tightened. He's been part of it all along. Emma placed a hand on his arm. Then maybe this is how it was supposed to happen. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He stood by the ocean, wind whipping against his coat, staring into the horizon where water met sky. He had spent his life chasing control, and now everything, his company, his legacy, his family, had unraveled into something he couldn't predict. And yet, for the first time, it didn't feel like loss. It felt like release. The next morning he went to the foundation office. The staff froze as he entered. The fallen billionaire, the man who had given it all away. And sitting at the far end of the hall, reading through papers, was the man from the photograph. When Daniel said his name, Samuel, the man looked up. Their eyes met, no words, no denial. Just recognition, the kind that lives in the bones. I thought you were dead, Daniel whispered. Samuel smiled faintly. I was. For a long time. The two men stood in silence for what felt like an eternity, the weight of generations hanging between them. Then Samuel said softly, Our father wanted to build walls. Maybe it's time we build bridges instead. Daniel's voice broke. He'd hate that. Samuel laughed quietly. Then we'll do it in his honor. When Daniel returned to the cafe that night, Emma was waiting, her apron dusted with flour, her hands still warm from the oven. He walked straight to her, exhaustion written in his eyes, but something else too. Peace, did you find him? She asked. He nodded. And I found something else. She tilted her head. What? He took her hand, his voice barely a whisper. The end of pretending that I'm broken. Her smile trembled. And what happens now? He looked around the cafe, the place that had witnessed his downfall and rebirth. Now. I cook. But before Emma could respond, the bell above the door chimed again. It wasn't Olivia this time. It wasn't a journalist or a lawyer. It was Samuel. And behind him stood a group of children holding notebooks and papers, orphans from the Foundation's first project. Samuel smiled at his brother. You said you wanted to build something honest. So let's start here. Emma's eyes glistened. You mean here? In the cafe? Daniel turned to her, his voice steady. No, not just here, everywhere. But as they welcomed the children in from the rain, one question lingered unspoken in his heart, one that only she could answer. Would she still stay once his world was rebuilt? Weeks turned into months, and the cafe by the sea became something no one could have predicted. A refuge. Every table carried a story now. Workers from the foundation, neighborhood children doing homework, families who'd once been customers at Daniel's restaurants before they closed. The place was alive in a way money had never been able to buy. Daniel's name was no longer on magazine covers. He wasn't the billionaire anymore. He was just Daniel, a man who chopped vegetables, brewed coffee, and sometimes laughed so hard he forgot what regret felt like. And Emma, she was the heart of it all. Her food, her patience, her quiet belief that warmth could heal what power could not. She never spoke about what they had been through, never used his name to gain attention, never asked for anything. But every time their eyes met across the counter, something in him softened, a silent gratitude that words could never carry. One evening, after closing, Samuel came by. He watched his brother wiping down tables, a faint smile tugging at his mouth. "You've changed," he said. Daniel chuckled. "I lost everything." It seemed like a good time to start. Samuel leaned on the doorframe. "You didn't lose. You traded up." Daniel looked up. "What do you mean?" "You used to own buildings. Now you build people." The words hit him deeply. For all the years he'd spent chasing numbers and empires, the laughter in the cafe, the smell of bread, the warmth of belonging, this felt like legacy. When Samuel left, Daniel turned off the lights one by one, but before locking the door, he noticed Emma sitting by the window, lost in thought. The rain outside had started again, soft and steady, the same rain that had been falling the night she first walked into his life. He walked over, sitting across from her. "You okay?" She nodded. "Just thinking." "About what?" "How strange life is," she said softly. "You hired me to cook for you, but somehow you ended up feeding everyone else." He smiled. "Maybe that was your secret recipe all along." She laughed quietly, her gaze meeting his. Maybe it was. For a while neither spoke. The air between them felt sacred, calm, glowing with something unspoken yet undeniable. He finally broke the silence. "You could leave, you know. You don't owe me anything. You could open your own restaurant. Start fresh." She tilted her head. "And why would I do that?" He blinked. "Because you deserve more than this." Her smile was soft but steady. "This is more than I ever dreamed of. People who come here aren't customers. They're family. And you're not the man who hired me anymore. You're the man who learned to care." His throat tightened. "Emma," she reached across the table, taking his hand. "You gave away your fortune, Daniel. But you found something richer. You found peace. And peace is love in disguise." He looked at her fingers entwined with his, simple, warm, real. And for the first time, the weight he'd carried for years simply disappeared. Outside, lightning flickered over the sea, the reflection catching in her eyes. The sound of the waves mingled with the rain, the rhythm slow and steady like a heartbeat. He squeezed her hand gently. "You once told me that love means trust. I didn't understand then, but I do now." She smiled, tears brightening her eyes. "Then you finally learned my best recipe." He leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. "The one that changed my life." This time there was no hesitation. No wealth, no fear, no empire between them. Just two souls meeting in the quiet space where everything that once mattered had fallen away. When they kissed, it wasn't a grand gesture. It was simple, human, perfect. And as the rain poured harder, the cafe lights flickering against the glass, Daniel realized something he'd never thought possible, that losing everything had been the only way to truly gain something. Outside, the sign that once read Holland and Cumber's Cafe had been repainted by hand. Just two words now glowed softly through the rain. Emma's Place. He smiled when he saw it, turning to her. "You renamed it," she shrugged. "You built the walls." "I filled them," he nodded, his eyes warm. "Then it's home." She rested her head on his shoulder, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. The storm outside had lost its thunder. All that remained was the rhythm of rain against glass and the steady pulse of a life rebuilt from ashes. Before the lights went out for the night, he whispered, more to the room than to her, "If anyone's listening, this is what love beyond money looks like." And somewhere in that quiet little cafe by the sea, it felt like the world finally agreed. Subscribed to be part of stories that still believe in love, the kind that rebuilds, redeems, and begins again.